The autumn rain hammered against the corrugated metal roof of the detention facility in rural Alabama, each drop echoing like a countdown to despair. Inside cell block C, Maya Rodriguez sat on the concrete floor, her wrists raw from the shackles that had bound her for 3 months. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting harsh shadows across her bruised face, but her dark eyes still burned with the same fire that had made her dangerous to those in power. "Prisoner 4721, you have a visitor," the guard's voice cut through the monotonous hum of the facility. Maya looked up, confused. No one had come to see her since her arrest. Her family had been threatened into silence, her colleagues from the community organization scattered to the wind. As she was led through the sterile corridors, Maya's mind drifted back to the day that changed everything. She had been standing on the courthouse steps in Montgomery, a megaphone in her hand, addressing a crowd of migrant workers who had been cheated out of their wages by local contractors. Her voice had carried across the square as she demanded justice, her words cutting through years of silence and fear. "They want us to be invisible," she had shouted that day, her voice cracking with emotion. "They want us to accept scraps while they feast on our labor. But we are not invisible. We are here, we matter, and we will not be silenced." The crowd had erupted in cheers, but Maya had spotted the unmarked vehicles at the edge of the square. She knew she was being watched, knew that her activism had painted a target on her back. The local agricultural lobby had deep pockets and deeper connections, and Maya's organization had been exposing their exploitation of undocumented workers for months. 2 weeks later, they came for her in the night. False charges of inciting violence, conspiracy and trespassing. The evidence was fabricated, but the system was rigged. Her court-appointed lawyer barely showed up, and the judge seemed to have already made up his mind before the trial began. Now, as she entered the visiting room, Maya's breath caught in her throat. Sitting at the metal table was a man she didn't recognize. Tall, weathered, with calloused hands and kind eyes that seemed out of place in this harsh environment. He wore a simple flannel shirt and jeans, and when he stood to greet her, she noticed the way he moved with quiet confidence. "Miss Rodriguez," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "My name is Samuel Turner. I own a farm about 50 miles north of here." Maya studied his face, searching for any sign of deception. In her line of work, she had learned to read people quickly, to identify allies and enemies within moments of meeting them. But Samuel Turner was different. There was something genuine about him that made her lower her guard slightly. "Why are you here?" she asked, her voice hoarse from months of limited use. Samuel's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Because what happened to you is wrong, and because I have the means to help." He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "I've been following your case, Miss Rodriguez. The charges against you, the trial. None of it was about justice. It was about silencing someone who dared to speak up for people who can't speak for themselves." Maya felt a flicker of hope, quickly suppressed by years of disappointment. "And what exactly do you think you can do? The system doesn't care about justice when there's money involved." Samuel reached into his jacket and pulled out a manila folder. "I've hired the best legal team in the state, constitutional lawyers who specialize in civil rights cases. They've been building your appeal while you've been in here." The folder contained documents that made Maya's heart race, evidence of prosecutorial misconduct, witness testimonies recanting their statements, financial records showing payments from agricultural companies to key officials in her case. It was everything she had hoped for, but never dared to expect. "Why?" Maya whispered, her eyes filling with tears for the first time since her arrest. "You don't even know me." Samuel's expression softened. "Because 30 years ago, my father was a sharecropper in Mississippi. He tried to organize his fellow workers, tried to get them fair wages and better conditions. They burned his crops, threatened his family, and eventually drove us off the land. He paused, his hands clenching into fists. I swore I'd never let that happen to someone else if I had the power to stop it. The visiting hour was almost over, but Samuel had one more thing to say. "There's something else, Maya. May I call you Maya?" She nodded. "My farm. It's not just a farm. Over the years, I've been helping people, workers who've been blacklisted, families who've been threatened, activists who need a safe place to regroup. If you're willing, when you get out of here, you'll have a place to go." As the guard approached to end the visit, Maya felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Hope. Real, tangible hope that her voice hadn't been silenced forever, that her fight for justice wasn't over. "Mr. Turner," she called as he stood to leave. "Samuel, thank you." He turned back, and for the first time since entering the facility, he smiled. "Don't thank me yet, Maya. Thank me when you're free, and we're back to fighting the good fight together." As Maya was led back to her cell, she felt the weight of the shackles differently. They were still there, still cutting into her skin, but they no longer felt permanent. For the first time in 3 months, she allowed herself to believe that freedom was possible. Outside, Samuel sat in his pickup truck for several minutes, staring at the detention facility. He had told Maya the truth about his father, but he hadn't told her everything. He hadn't told her about the sleepless nights he'd spent researching her case, about the way her words from that courthouse rally had stirred something in him that he thought had died years ago. He hadn't told her that helping her wasn't just about justice, it was about finding his own purpose again. As he drove away, the rain began to clear, and for the first time in weeks, sunlight broke through the clouds. 6 weeks later, Maya stood on the courthouse steps in Montgomery once again, but this time the circumstances were drastically different. The same autumn wind that had carried her words of defiance months earlier now whipped through her hair as she emerged from the building, legally free for the first time since her arrest. The charges had been dropped, the corrupt officials exposed, and her name cleared. But freedom, Maya was learning, was more complicated than she had imagined. Samuel waited by his truck at the bottom of the steps, his presence a steady anchor in the chaos of reporters and supporters who had gathered for her release. The legal team he had hired stood nearby, fielding questions from the press, but Maya's attention was fixed on the quiet farmer who had changed her life. "How does it feel to be free, Miss Rodriguez?" a reporter shouted, thrusting a microphone toward her face. Maya paused, searching for the right words. How could she explain that freedom felt both exhilarating and terrifying? That after months of having every aspect of her life controlled, the simple act of choosing what to do next felt overwhelming. "Justice delayed is justice denied," she finally said, her voice carrying the authority that had made her such an effective organizer. But today, justice was served. Not just for me, but for every worker who's been silenced, every family who's been threatened, every person who's been told their voice doesn't matter. As the crowd began to disperse, Samuel approached her with characteristic quiet confidence. "Ready to get out of here?" he asked. Maya nodded, grateful for his understated presence. As they drove north toward his farm, she watched the Alabama countryside roll by, cotton fields giving way to smaller family farms, strip malls yielding to forests of pine and oak. The further they got from Montgomery, the more she felt her shoulders relax. "Tell me about your farm," Maya said, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled between them. Samuel's hands tightened slightly on the steering wheel. "It's different from what you might expect. I inherited the land from my uncle about 15 years ago, started with just cotton and corn, but over time it became something else." They turned down a gravel road lined with towering oaks, their branches forming a canopy overhead. Maya caught glimpses of buildings through the trees, not just the main farmhouse, but several smaller structures that looked like cabins or apartments. "Samuel," Maya said slowly, "exactly how many people live on your farm?" He smiled, the first genuinely relaxed expression she'd seen from him. "Depends on the season. Right now, about 23 adults and 8 children. Families mostly, some single folks who needed a fresh start." As they pulled up to the main house, Maya began to understand what Samuel had created. The property bustled with quiet activity. Children playing in a well-maintained playground, adults tending to extensive vegetable gardens, someone repairing the fence around a pasture where horses grazed peacefully. It wasn't just a farm, it was a community. "Maya!" A woman in her 50s approached them, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "I'm Elena Santos. We've been so excited to meet you." Over the next few hours, Maya was introduced to the residents of Turner Farm. There was Carlos, a former union organizer who had been blacklisted after a strike at a poultry processing plant. Maria and her 3 children, who had fled domestic violence with nothing but the clothes on their backs. David, a young man who had aged out of foster care with nowhere to go. Each person had a story, and each story had led them to Samuel's farm. "How do you make it work?" Maya asked Samuel as they sat on the porch of the main house that evening, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. "Carefully," Samuel replied with a wry smile. "We grow enough food to feed ourselves and sell the surplus at farmers' markets. Everyone contributes according to their abilities. Some folks are better with crops, others with livestock, some with maintenance or childcare. We pool resources, share responsibilities." Maya studied his profile in the fading light. "And you just opened your land to all these people? No questions asked?" Samuel was quiet for a long moment. "You know, after my father died, I spent years being angry. Angry at the system, angry at injustice, angry at my own powerlessness. I made money, bought this land, but I was still carrying all that rage around." He turned to look at her. "It wasn't until I started helping people that I realized the anger was eating me alive. This place... It's not charity, Maya. It's healing, for all of us." That night, Maya lay in the small but comfortable cabin Samuel had prepared for her, staring up at the ceiling and listening to the sounds of the countryside. Crickets chirping, an owl calling in the distance, the gentle lowing of cattle. For the first time in months she felt truly safe. But safety, she was beginning to realize, came with its own challenges. The next morning, as she sat at the communal breakfast table, surrounded by Samuel's extended family of refugees and outcasts, Maya felt the familiar itch of purpose, the need to act. She had spent her entire adult life fighting for justice, organizing communities, challenging systems of oppression. Now what? "What's the plan?" she asked Samuel as they walked through the fields after breakfast. "What do you mean?" "I mean, what's next? I can't just hide out here forever, Samuel. There are still people out there who need help, workers being exploited, families being threatened. The same system that put me in chains is still operating." Samuel stopped walking and turned to face her. "Maya, you just got out of prison yesterday. Don't you think you deserve some time to recover, to figure out what you want to do next?" "What I want to do is get back to work," Maya said, her voice rising with frustration. "Every day I'm not fighting is another day that people are suffering. And what good will you do anyone if you burn yourself out? If you get arrested again? If you—" Samuel stopped himself, but Maya caught the implication. "If I get killed, you mean?" They stood facing each other in the middle of the cotton field, the morning sun beating down on them, 2 people who barely knew each other but were bound together by circumstances neither of them had fully chosen. "I've seen what happens to people like you, Maya," Samuel said quietly. "People who can't stop fighting, who can't take a break, who think they have to carry the weight of the world on their shoulders. It destroys them." Maya felt tears prick at her eyes, but she blinked them back. "And I've seen what happens to people when good people do nothing, Samuel. They get ground up by a system that doesn't care about their humanity." They stared at each other for a long moment, neither backing down, both recognizing the truth in the other's words. Finally, Samuel sighed. "Okay," he said, "but if you're going to keep fighting, you're not doing it alone anymore. We do this smart, we do this safe, and we do this together." Maya felt her chest tighten with an emotion she couldn't quite name. When was the last time someone had offered to stand with her instead of just cheering from the sidelines? "Together," she repeated, testing the word on her tongue. As they walked back toward the farmhouse, Maya caught Samuel glancing at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. There was admiration there, certainly, and concern, but something else too, something that made her heart skip a beat and reminded her that freedom came in many forms. That evening, as the community gathered for dinner, Maya found herself studying the faces around the table. These were people who had been broken by the same systems she had spent her life fighting. But here, under Samuel's quiet leadership, they had found something precious, a place to belong, a chance to heal, a community that valued them for who they were rather than what they had lost. For the first time since leaving prison, Maya began to wonder if there might be more than one way to change the world. 3 months after her arrival at Turner Farm, Maya had settled into a rhythm she never thought possible. Her days began before dawn, helping Elena prepare breakfast for the community, followed by work in the vegetable gardens, where she discovered an unexpected talent for coaxing life from the earth. But it was the evenings that had become most precious to her. Long conversations with Samuel on the porch, planning not just the farm's future, but something much bigger. "The regional farmers market in Birmingham wants us to be their featured vendor next month," Samuel said, reviewing the paperwork spread across the kitchen table. "It's good money, but more importantly, it's visibility." Maya looked up from the laptop where she'd been drafting a newsletter for their growing network of allied farms. "Visibility cuts both ways, Samuel. The more successful we become, the more attention we'll attract from people who don't want to see us succeed." It was a conversation they'd had variations of many times over the past few months. Maya's legal victory had made her something of a folk hero in activist circles, and Samuel's farm had begun attracting attention from journalists, academics, and other organizers interested in their model of sustainable community agriculture. But success brought scrutiny, and scrutiny brought risk. "Maya," Samuel said, his voice gentle but firm, "we can't let fear dictate our choices." That's exactly what they want. She knew he was right, but the protective instincts that had kept her alive through years of dangerous activism were hard to quiet. Since arriving at the farm, she had watched Samuel navigate challenges with a patience and wisdom that both impressed and frustrated her. Where she saw injustice that needed to be confronted immediately, he saw problems that required careful, strategic solutions. Their different approaches had led to more than one heated discussion, but they had also begun to complement each other in ways that surprised them both. Maya brought passion, connections, and media savvy to their efforts. Samuel provided stability, resources, and the kind of steady leadership that made people want to follow him into uncertain territory. "There's something else," Samuel said, his tone shifting to something more serious. "I got a call from James Mitchell yesterday." Maya's blood ran cold. Mitchell was the agricultural lobby lawyer who had orchestrated her prosecution, a man whose influence extended far beyond Alabama's borders. "What did he want?" "To make me an offer," Samuel said grimly. "He wants to buy the farm, said he represents investors who are interested in consolidating small agricultural operations in the region. How much? Maya asked, though she already knew Samuel's answer wouldn't matter. Enough to make me rich and relocate everyone here to somewhere far away and much quieter. Samuel's jaw tightened. He also mentioned that continued activism might make it difficult for the farm to maintain its agricultural tax exemptions. Maya felt the familiar fire rising in her chest. They're threatening you because of me. They're threatening us because we're proving that there's another way to do things, Samuel corrected. Because we're showing that workers don't have to choose between exploitation and unemployment. Because we're building something they can't control. Before Maya could respond, Elena burst through the kitchen door, her face flushed with excitement. "You need to see this," she said, holding up her phone. "The news is covering the story about the poultry plant in Culman. The workers are striking, and they're using your playbook, Maya." On Elena's phone screen, Maya watched footage of workers marching outside a massive processing facility, carrying signs demanding fair wages and safe working conditions. The reporter mentioned that the organizers had been inspired by the recent legal victory of activist Maya Rodriguez and the success of community-supported agriculture initiatives like Turner Farm. "They're not just talking about labor rights," Elena continued breathlessly. "They're talking about alternative economic models, about worker-owned cooperatives, about revolution," Maya whispered, her heart pounding as she watched the screen. Over the following weeks, the farm became a hub of activity as organizers, journalists, and curious supporters made pilgrimages to see what Samuel and Maya had built. The phone rang constantly with requests for interviews, invitations to speak at conferences, and pleas for help from other communities trying to replicate their model. Maya was caught between excitement and fear. The movement she had dreamed of was becoming real, but its growing visibility made them a target. Her concerns were confirmed when surveillance equipment was found hidden in the woods. Samuel's reaction was chilling, a quiet, controlled fury that revealed the strength beneath his calm surface. That night, he took Maya to a secluded spot to talk. She acknowledged what they both knew. They were being watched. Samuel suspected it had been happening since his first prison visit to her. The real question was what they would do now. As they discussed options, Maya realized Samuel was considering Mitchell's offer. He was thinking about the people who relied on Turner Farm, the families, the children, the ones who had rebuilt their lives there. Maya, on the other hand, thought of those still trapped outside the farm, victims of broken systems. When Samuel argued that walking away might be the smart choice, Maya pushed back. Accepting the money would signal that even integrity had a price she wasn't willing to put on their mission. As evening fell, Maya and Samuel stood across the still pond, their raised voices breaking the calm. Samuel's eyes held the weight of every life he had taken under his wing. Maya, unwavering, challenged him, accusing him of protecting those close to him at the cost of those still suffering beyond their borders. Samuel pushed back. She cared so deeply about the world out there that she was willing to sacrifice those standing beside her. They both knew they couldn't save everyone, but they disagreed on what counted as enough. For Maya, justice had to be whole. For Samuel, saving some lives already mattered. Then, in a moment of raw vulnerability, Samuel confessed the truth he'd been holding back. He loved her, not just for her convictions, but for her heart, for her willingness to sacrifice, to carry the pain of others, to believe fiercely in something better. It stunned Maya. Of all the things she had prepared for, she hadn't expected love, not from him, not now. He told her that what they had built together wasn't separate from her mission. It was part of it. When he kissed her, something inside Maya began to shift. For years, she believed love was a luxury she couldn't afford, that caring for someone specifically would weaken her fight for everyone. But in Samuel's arms, she saw that love could be strength, not distraction. When they pulled apart, Maya cupped his face. "I love you too," she said, "but I can't stop fighting. It's who I am." "I know," Samuel replied, resting his forehead against hers. "And I can't stop building places where people feel safe. It's who I am." "So what do we do now?" Samuel smiled, the same quiet resolve that had first brought him to her prison, the same strength that had built a community from the ground up. "We figure out how to do both," he said, "together." As they walked back to the farmhouse hand in hand, Maya felt something unfamiliar. The belief that maybe she didn't have to choose between love and justice. For the first time, she began to believe she could have both. But first, they had to survive what was coming. The attack came at dawn on a Tuesday morning in late spring, 6 months after Maya and Samuel had admitted their love for each other. Maya was in the vegetable garden, checking the tomato plants for signs of the blight that had been affecting farms throughout the region, when she heard the rumble of heavy machinery coming up the farm's access road. "Samuel!" she called, but he was already striding across the yard from the barn, his face grim with the knowledge they had both been dreading. 3 bulldozers led a convoy of vehicles up the gravel drive, followed by sheriff's deputies, county officials, and men in expensive suits who could only be lawyers. At the head of the procession walked James Mitchell, his silver hair gleaming in the morning sun, his smile as cold as January frost. "Samuel Turner," Mitchell called out as the machinery ground to a halt. "I believe we have some business to discuss." By this time, the entire community had gathered in the farmyard, adults positioning themselves protectively near the children, everyone's faces showing the same mixture of fear and defiance that Maya recognized from her years of activism. These were people who had been pushed around before, who had learned not to expect fairness from those in power. "You're trespassing on private property," Samuel said, his voice calm, but carrying clearly across the yard. Mitchell held up a sheaf of papers. "Actually, I'm here on behalf of the county. It seems there have been some irregularities with your property taxes, your agricultural exemptions, and your compliance with zoning regulations. The county has determined that this property is being used for purposes inconsistent with its agricultural designation." Maya felt her heart sink as she scanned the documents Mitchell held. She had seen this playbook before, the use of bureaucratic technicalities to shut down organizations and movements that threatened powerful interests. The fact that Turner Farm operated as a residential community as well as a working farm gave officials plenty of ammunition. "You have 30 days to bring the property into compliance or face seizure for unpaid penalties," Mitchell continued. "Of course, my clients remain interested in purchasing the land for fair market value, which would resolve all outstanding issues." "How much are the penalties?" Samuel asked, though Maya could see from his expression that he already suspected the answer would be impossibly high. $2.7 million, Mitchell said with obvious satisfaction, plus interest and processing fees. A gasp ran through the gathered community. Maya saw Elena grip her daughter's hand tighter, saw Carlos's shoulders slump with defeated recognition. They all knew what this meant, the end of the sanctuary they had built together. But Samuel surprised everyone, including Maya, with his response. He threw back his head and laughed, a rich, genuine sound that seemed completely incongruous with the moment. "Mr. Mitchell?" Samuel said, his voice still carrying traces of amusement. "Do you know what my farm produced last year?" Mitchell frowned, clearly not expecting this reaction. "I fail to see how that's relevant to—" $47,000 in profit, Samuel continued. "Now, I'm no mathematician, but it seems to me that at that rate it would take me about 57 years to pay off your penalties." Assuming, of course, that I stopped eating, stopped paying for seeds and equipment, and somehow convinced my neighbors to work for free. The tension was undeniable, even among the sheriff's deputies, as Samuel calmly stood up to Mitchell's threats. When offered money to quietly relocate the community, he refused. "We're not for sale." After the officials left, the Turner Farm community gathered, aware this was more than a legal issue. It was a deliberate attempt to dismantle what they had built. Maya called it what it was: a quiet war. They wouldn't fight with anger, but with strategy. Maya and Samuel launched a tireless campaign, using her activist network and his long-earned trust in farming circles. The real shift came when Dr. Jennifer Harrison, an agricultural economist, revealed that Turner Farm's model had wide-reaching economic impact. With her research, they reframed the story, from zoning violations to a political attack on innovation. The campaign went viral. Supporters arrived in droves. Media coverage turned in their favor. Public pressure mounted until the county quietly dropped its case. Turner Farm had won not just legally, but symbolically. It had become a beacon. 6 months later, Maya spoke at the launch of a national network inspired by their success. Once jailed for defending her people, she now stood free, with Samuel at her side, proving that true revolution lies not just in resistance, but in building something better. They returned home not as survivors, but as founders of a movement ready to keep building together.